Some marriages begin with love letters and moonlit promises. Others start with desperation, a handshake, and the exchange of livestock. This is the story of a man who thought he was buying a cow and ended up discovering that the greatest treasures in life come wrapped in packages we never expect. What happened on his wedding night changed everything he believed about worth, beauty, and the meaning of true wealth. But the real shock came 3 months later, when he finally understood why his bride had bolted that door. The summer of 1987 brought the worst drought anyone in Clayton County had seen in 40 years. The sun hung in the sky like an angry orange ball, refusing to give any mercy to the cracked earth below. Farmers watched their crops wither and die. Cattle grew thin, their ribs showing through dusty hides. Wells ran dry, and hope seemed to evaporate along with the last drops of water. Samuel Turner stood at the edge of his property, looking out at what remained of his father's legacy. The fence posts leaned at tired angles, held together by rusted wire and stubborn determination. Beyond them stretched 70 acres of brown grass and broken dreams. His father had worked this land for 35 years. His grandfather before that. Now, at 28 years old, Samuel was watching it all slip through his fingers like the dry soil that blew across the empty fields. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with a dirty handkerchief and turned back toward the farmhouse. The old wooden structure had seen better days. The white paint was peeling, the porch steps creaked dangerously, and the roof leaked in 3 different places when it rained. Not that rain had been a problem lately. Samuel could not remember the last time he had heard thunder or seen clouds gather in the pale sky. Inside the house, the kitchen table held a stack of bills that seemed to grow taller every week. Samuel sat down heavily in the wooden chair, the same chair where his father used to sit every morning with his coffee and newspaper. The chair creaked under his weight, protesting like everything else on this dying farm. He spread the bills out before him, each one a reminder of his failures. The bank wanted their mortgage payment. The feed store was demanding payment for the supplies he had bought on credit 3 months ago. The electric company had sent their final warning. In 2 weeks, they would shut off the power. Samuel did not know what he would do then. He could not run the water pump without electricity. Without water, the last of his cattle would die. He had 12 cows left. Just 12, when his father had once run a herd of over 200. Disease had taken some. He had sold others to pay bills. Last month, he had watched 3 of them collapse from thirst and never get up again. He had stood there, unable to do anything, as the life drained from their big brown eyes. That night, he had cried for the first time since his mother's funeral 8 years ago. Samuel looked around the empty kitchen. The house felt too big for just one person. His mother had died when he was 20, taken by cancer that no amount of prayer or medicine could stop. His father had followed 5 years later, his heart giving out during the harvest. Some said he died of a broken heart, missing his wife too much to keep living without her. Samuel understood that feeling now, though he had never experienced the kind of love his parents shared. He had been too busy trying to save the farm to think about finding a wife. Not that many women would want him anyway. Samuel caught his reflection in the window glass and turned away from it. He was tall and too thin, his clothes hanging on his frame like they belonged to someone larger. His face was weathered beyond his years, tan and lined from long hours in the sun. His hands were rough and calloused, the hands of a working man. His brown hair was always messy, no matter how much he tried to comb it down. He was not ugly, but he was not handsome either. He was just ordinary, and ordinary did not count for much in a world that valued success and money. He needed both, and he had neither. The letter from the bank lay on top of the pile, its official letterhead seeming to mock him. They were giving him 60 days to catch up on his payments, or they would start foreclosure proceedings. 60 days. Samuel laughed bitterly. He could not make that much money in 60 days even if he worked every hour without sleeping. The numbers simply did not add up. He thought about selling some of his remaining cattle, but the market prices were terrible because of the drought. Everyone was selling, and no one was buying. He might get $50 a head if he was lucky. That would barely make a dent in what he owed. Samuel pushed back from the table and walked to the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed to mock the dying land below. Somewhere out there, his 12 cows were gathered around the nearly empty water tank, waiting for water that he was running out of. He had been hauling water from the creek 5 miles away, but even that was starting to dry up. Soon, there would be nothing left. He thought about giving up. He could sell the farm, or what was left of it, pay off his debts, and start over somewhere else. Maybe he could find work in the city, get a job in a factory or a warehouse. He was strong and willing to work hard. Surely someone would hire him. But the thought of leaving this land, the land his family had worked for 3 generations, made his chest ache with a pain that was almost physical. His mother was buried here, in the small cemetery on the hill behind the house. His father lay beside her. His grandparents were there too, along with an uncle who had died in the war and an aunt who had passed during childbirth. This land held his family's history, their blood and sweat and tears. How could he just walk away from all of that? The next morning, Samuel drove his old pickup truck into town. The truck was 15 years old and held together mostly by rust and prayers. It coughed and sputtered as he pulled into the parking lot of Miller's feed store, but it got him there, which was all he could ask. Inside the store, the cool air felt like a blessing after the heat outside. Samuel nodded to a few familiar faces as he made his way to the counter. Everyone knew everyone in Clayton County. They had all grown up together, gone to the same small school, attended the same church on Sundays. They also all knew that Samuel Turner was struggling. He could see it in their eyes, that mixture of pity and relief that it was him and not them. Old Hank Miller stood behind the counter, his white apron stained with years of work. He had owned this feed store for as long as Samuel could remember. As a boy, Samuel used to come here with his father, and Hank would always give him a piece of candy from the jar by the register. Those days seemed like a lifetime ago now. Hank looked up as Samuel approached, and his face settled into an expression of discomfort. Samuel knew what was coming before Hank even opened his mouth. "Samuel," Hank said slowly, "I hate to bring this up, but that bill of yours is getting pretty big. The wife is on me about it. You know I would let it slide if I could, but business has been tough for everyone with this drought." Samuel nodded, his face burning with shame. "I know, Hank. I am working on it. I just need a little more time." Hank sighed and rubbed his hand over his bald head. "I have heard that before, son. From you and about a dozen other folks. I am not trying to be hard on you, but I have got my own bills to pay. My suppliers do not care about droughts or hard times. They want their money same as everyone else." "I understand," Samuel said quietly. "How much do I owe?" Hank pulled out a ledger from under the counter and flipped through the pages. $347. That is including the interest. Samuel felt his stomach drop. $347. He might as well have owed $1 million. He did not have 347 cents to his name. "I will figure something out," he said, though he had no idea what that something might be. Hank closed the ledger and leaned forward on the counter. "Listen, Samuel. I knew your daddy. He was a good man, one of the best. I do not want to see you lose everything he worked for. But I cannot keep extending credit forever. You have got until the end of the month. After that, I am going to have to insist on payment." Samuel nodded and turned to leave, but Hank called out to him. "Wait a second. Did you hear about the Hendricks place?" Samuel turned back, confused. "Old man Hendricks? What about him?" Hank leaned in closer, lowering his voice even though the store was nearly empty. "He passed away last week. Heart attack, they say. His daughter came in from the city to settle his affairs. Word is she is selling everything. The land, the house, all the livestock. Wants to get rid of it quick and get back to wherever she came from." Samuel felt a flicker of interest despite his troubles. The Hendricks farm was about 10 miles north of his property. Old man Hendricks had been a recluse, rarely coming into town and keeping to himself. No one knew much about him or his family. "Why are you telling me this?" Samuel asked. Hank shrugged. "I heard she is selling some of his cattle cheap. Real cheap. If you could get your hands on a few good breeding cows, maybe you could turn things around. Build up your herd again when the drought breaks." "With what money?" Samuel asked bitterly. "I do not know about that," Hank admitted. "But I thought you should know. Sometimes opportunities come from strange places. Your daddy taught me that." Samuel thanked Hank and left the store, his mind churning with thoughts. A few good breeding cows could make a difference. If the drought broke, if the rains came, if he could hold on long enough, he might be able to rebuild. But those were a lot of ifs, and they all depended on money he did not have. He drove home slowly, the truck's engine groaning in protest at every hill. The sun beat down mercilessly, and heat waves shimmered off the road ahead of him. By the time he pulled into his driveway, his shirt was soaked with sweat and his throat was dry as dust. That evening, as Samuel sat on his porch watching the sun go down, he heard the sound of a car coming up the road. It was unusual to have visitors this far out, and he stood up to see who it might be. A sleek black car pulled into his driveway, so out of place on this dusty farm road that it seemed like something from another world. The car stopped, and a man stepped out. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than everything Samuel owned put together. His shoes were shiny and new, his hair was slicked back, and he carried a leather briefcase. Samuel recognized him immediately. Vernon Hayes, the lawyer from town. Vernon had handled his father's estate after he died, and Samuel still remembered the cold, efficient way the man had dealt with everything. Vernon did not care about people. He cared about money and the power it brought. "Mr. Turner," Vernon said, extending his hand with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Good evening. I hope I am not interrupting." Samuel shook his hand reluctantly. "What can I do for you, Vernon?" Vernon looked around the property, his eyes taking in the rundown house, the leaning fences, the dry fields. Samuel felt a flush of shame, knowing how this place must look to someone like Vernon Hayes. "I was in the area and thought I would stop by," Vernon said. "I represent a client who is interested in purchasing land in this county. Your property came up in our discussions." Samuel's heart sank. "The bank send you?" Vernon shook his head. No. This is a private matter. My client is willing to pay a fair price for your land. Cash, no complications. You could pay off your debts, start fresh somewhere else." Samuel looked out at the fields that his family had worked for generations. He thought about his parents' graves on the hill, about the history soaked into every inch of this soil. "It is not for sale," he said quietly. Vernon raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Turner, let us be realistic. You are behind on your mortgage, you owe money all over town, and this drought shows no sign of breaking. In a few months, maybe sooner, the bank is going to take this land anyway. Would you not rather sell it on your terms, walk away with something in your pocket?" "I said it is not for sale." Samuel's voice was harder now, his jaw set. Vernon sighed and reached into his briefcase, pulling out a business card. "I understand. These decisions are not easy. But, when you change your mind, and you will change your mind, give me a call. My client's offer will stand for the next 30 days. After that, well, we will see what happens." He placed the card on the porch railing and walked back to his car. Samuel watched him drive away, the black car disappearing in a cloud of dust, taking with it the easy way out. That night, Samuel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep would not come, no matter how tired his body felt. His mind kept racing, turning over problems that had no solutions, adding up numbers that never came out right. He thought about Vernon's offer. The smart thing to do would be to take it. Pay off his debts, walk away with whatever money was left, start over somewhere else. It was the logical choice, the practical choice. But Samuel Turner had never been good at being practical. His mother used to say he had too much heart and not enough head. His father said he was stubborn as a mule, which coming from a farmer was both a complaint and a compliment. He rolled over and looked at the photograph on his nightstand. His parents on their wedding day, young and happy and full of hope. His mother was beautiful in her simple white dress, his father handsome in his borrowed suit. They were holding hands and looking at each other like the rest of the world did not exist. Samuel wondered what that felt like. To have someone look at you that way. To have someone who would stand beside you through the good times and the bad, the droughts and the floods, the failures and the successes. His parents had that. They had 40 years together, building a life on this land, raising a family, growing old side by side. He had nothing. Just an empty house, a failing farm, and a mountain of debt. The next morning, Samuel did something he rarely did anymore. He got in his truck and drove to church. It was a Wednesday, and the building was empty except for Pastor Williams, who was sitting in the front pew, reading from a worn Bible. The pastor looked up as Samuel entered, and a warm smile spread across his weathered face. Pastor Williams had known Samuel since he was a baby, had baptized him in the creek behind the church, had officiated at both of his parents' funerals. "Samuel Turner," the pastor said, rising to greet him. "It has been too long. Come, sit with me." Samuel walked down the aisle and took a seat beside the old man. The church smelled like it always had, of old wood and candle wax and something indefinable that Samuel could only describe as holiness. "I do not know why I came here," Samuel admitted. "I just could not sit in that empty house anymore." Pastor Williams nodded knowingly. "Sometimes we end up where we need to be, even if we do not understand why. Tell me what is troubling you, son." Samuel told him everything. The drought, the debts, the dying cattle, Vernon Hayes and his offer. He talked until he ran out of words, and then he sat in silence, waiting for the pastor to say something wise that would make it all make sense. But Pastor Williams did not offer any easy answers. Instead, he closed his Bible and looked at Samuel with eyes that had seen too much of life to offer false comfort. "You know," the pastor said slowly, "I have been a minister for 43 years. In that time, I have seen folks go through all kinds of hardships. Droughts, floods, fires, deaths, bankruptcies. You name it, I have watched someone struggle through it." Samuel nodded, wondering where this was going. "The ones who made it through," Pastor Williams continued, "they all had one thing in common. It was not money, though that helped. It was not luck, though some of them had that too. It was something else. They had people. Family, friends, neighbors. They had folks who would stand with them when everything else was falling apart. I do not have that," Samuel said quietly. "My parents are gone. I do not have any brothers or sisters. My cousins all moved away years ago. I am alone out there." Pastor Williams reached over and patted Samuel's hand. "That is what I am getting at, son. A man was not meant to carry burdens alone. The good book says that two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, thinking about those words. Then, he asked, "What are you saying, Pastor? That I need to find a wife?" Pastor Williams chuckled softly. "I am saying that you might want to open yourself up to possibilities you have not considered before. God works in mysterious ways, Samuel. Sometimes the answers to our prayers come in packages we never expected." Samuel left the church feeling no less troubled than when he arrived, but with something new turning over in his mind. A wife. The idea seemed absurd. He had nothing to offer a woman. No money, no future, nothing but hard work and heartache. But, as he drove past the old Hendricks place on his way home, he remembered what Hank Miller had said about the daughter selling off the livestock. On impulse, he turned down the long dirt road that led to the Hendricks farmhouse. The place looked better than his own, which was not saying much. The house was larger, 2 stories with a wraparound porch, but the paint was peeling and the windows looked like they had not been cleaned in years. Old man Hendricks had clearly not been interested in appearances. Samuel parked his truck and walked up to the front door. Before he could knock, it swung open, and he found himself face to face with a woman he had never seen before. She was not what he expected. She was tall, almost as tall as he was, with broad shoulders and wide hips. Her face was round and plain, with small eyes behind thick glasses. Her brown hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She was wearing a faded dress that strained against her full figure. But what struck Samuel most was the expression in her eyes. There was a sharpness there, an intelligence that seemed out of place in this rundown farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious but not unfriendly. Samuel pulled off his hat, remembering his manners. "I am Samuel Turner. I have a farm about 10 miles south of here. I heard you might be selling some cattle, and I was hoping to take a look." The woman studied him for a long moment, her eyes traveling from his worn boots to his faded shirt to his sunburned face. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she stepped back and gestured for him to come inside. "I am Margaret Hendricks," she said. "My father passed away last week. I am trying to settle his estate and get back to the city as quickly as possible." Samuel followed her through the dim interior of the house. Despite its rundown appearance from outside, the inside was surprisingly clean and organized. Books lined the walls in every room, more books than Samuel had ever seen outside of a library. He was so busy looking at them that he almost walked into Margaret when she stopped in the kitchen. "The cattle are out back," she said. "But, before we go look at them, I should tell you that I am not interested in negotiating. My father kept meticulous records. I know what these animals are worth, and I know what the market will bear. I am selling at a fair price, nothing more, nothing less." Samuel nodded. "Fair enough. I would not expect anything else." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "Good. I have had 3 other buyers come by already, and they all tried to take advantage of me because I am a woman from the city. They assumed I did not know anything about farming or cattle." "And, do you?" Samuel asked, genuinely curious. Margaret almost smiled. "I grew up on this farm until I was 18. I left for college and never came back, but that does not mean I forgot everything I learned here. My father might have been a recluse, but he was an excellent farmer. He taught me well." She led him out the back door and across a yard that was surprisingly green. Samuel noticed a well with a hand pump, and, beyond that, a small windmill that was slowly turning in the breeze. "How do you still have water?" he asked, amazed. "Everyone else's wells have gone dry." "My father drilled deep," Margaret explained. "Very deep. He hid an underground spring about 200 feet down. It has never run dry, not even in the worst droughts. That is one of the main selling points of this property, actually. The lawyer says the land is worth more than I expected because of that water." Samuel felt a surge of envy, followed quickly by a practical thought. If he could somehow get access to that water, he could save his remaining cattle. He could even expand his herd, rebuild what he had lost. They reached the pasture, and Samuel forgot about the water as he stared at the cattle before him. There were about 30 head, and they were some of the finest animals he had ever seen. Their coats were glossy, their eyes bright, their bodies well-fed and healthy. While every other rancher in the county was watching their livestock waste away, Old Man Hendricks had been quietly maintaining a herd that looked like it belonged in a show ring. "These are incredible," Samuel breathed. Margaret nodded proudly. "My father bred them himself. Crossed Black Angus with Hereford to get the best qualities of both. They are excellent producers, hardy, and they have good temperaments. The breeding bull alone is worth a fortune." Samuel walked along the fence, studying each animal with the practiced eye of a man who had grown up around cattle. Every single one was healthy, well-formed, and clearly the result of careful breeding. His heart ached with wanting, even as his mind reminded him that he could not afford to buy even one of them. "How much for the lot?" he asked, not really expecting an answer he could work with. Margaret quoted him a price that made him wince. It was fair, just as she had promised, but it was more money than he had ever had in his life. He could not afford a single cow, let alone the entire herd. "I appreciate you showing me," he said, putting his hat back on. "But I am afraid it is out of my range." "Way out." Margaret walked beside him back toward the house. "I am sorry to hear that. You seem like someone who would take good care of them." Samuel laughed bitterly. "I would like to think so. But it does not matter what I think. I could not buy a single calf right now, let alone a breeding herd." They reached his truck, and Samuel prepared to leave, already calculating how much gas he had wasted on this pointless trip. But Margaret spoke up, stopping him. "Mr. Turner, can I ask you something personal?" He turned back to face her, surprised. "I suppose. Are you married?" The question caught him completely off guard. "No." "Why?" Margaret looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers together nervously. When she looked back up, there was something in her eyes that Samuel could not quite identify. Desperation, maybe, or determination, or some complicated mixture of both. "Because," she said slowly, "I might have a proposition for you. One that could help both of us." Samuel waited, not sure what to expect. Margaret took a deep breath. "I am in a difficult situation, Mr. Turner. My father left this farm to me, along with all its assets. But he also left behind certain conditions in his will. Conditions that my lawyer says are technically unenforceable but would tie me up in legal battles for years if I tried to challenge them." "What kind of conditions?" Margaret's face reddened. "My father was a traditional man. Old-fashioned. He believed that a woman's place was on a farm, raising a family, not living alone in the city. His will states that I can only inherit the full value of his estate if I am married and living on a working farm within 90 days of his death. Otherwise, everything goes to a distant cousin I have never met." Samuel stared at her, not understanding. "What does that have to do with me?" Margaret squared her shoulders and looked him directly in the eye. "I am proposing a business arrangement, Mr. Turner. You need cattle to save your farm. I need a husband, at least temporarily, to secure my inheritance. If you marry me, I will give you one of my father's best breeding cows as a wedding gift. After the inheritance is settled, we can divorce quietly, and you can keep the cow." Samuel was speechless. Of all the things he had expected when he drove up that dirt road, a marriage proposal was not among them. "You want me to marry you for a cow," he finally managed. Margaret's face flushed deeper. "I know how it sounds. And, believe me, I would not be asking if I had any other option. But I have spent 10 years building a career in the city. I have a good job, a apartment, a life. I refuse to lose my father's legacy because of some outdated conditions in a will he wrote 30 years ago." Samuel ran a hand through his hair, trying to process what she was saying. "But marriage is not just a piece of paper. It is a commitment, a sacrament. You cannot just buy and sell it like livestock." "I am not buying and selling anything," Margaret said firmly. "I am offering a mutually beneficial arrangement between two adults who both need something the other can provide. You get a cow that could save your farm. I get to keep what is rightfully mine. After a reasonable amount of time, we part ways amicably. No one gets hurt." Samuel wanted to say no. Every instinct he had screamed that this was wrong, that marriage was not something to be entered into for practical reasons, that his parents would be rolling in their graves at the very idea. But then, he thought about those graves, up on the hill behind his house. He thought about his mother's gentle smile and his father's calloused hands. He thought about the land they had worked so hard to build into something worth passing down. And he thought about losing it all, watching strangers move onto his family's property while he walked away with nothing but memories and regret. "Let me think about it," he heard himself say. Margaret nodded. "That is fair. But I do not have much time. The clock is ticking on my 90 days. I need an answer within the week." Samuel drove home in a daze, his mind spinning with thoughts and questions and fears. Marry a stranger for a cow? It sounded like something out of a bad joke or an old fairy tale. It was not the kind of thing that happened in real life. But, as he pulled up to his empty farmhouse and looked out at his dying fields, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, it was exactly the kind of thing that needed to happen. Pastor Williams's words echoed in his head. Sometimes the answers to our prayers come in packages we never expected. Samuel had prayed for help. He had prayed for salvation. He had prayed for some way, any way, to save his family's land. Maybe this was God's answer. Maybe Margaret Hendricks, with her plain face and sharp eyes and unusual proposition, was exactly what he had been praying for. Or maybe it was the worst idea he had ever had in his life. He spent the next 3 days unable to think about anything else. He went through the motions of his daily chores, feeding his remaining cattle, checking the nearly empty water tank, walking the fence lines that seemed more like boundaries of a prison than a farm. All the while, Margaret's offer played on repeat in his mind. On the 4th day, he sat down at his kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pencil. He wrote down all the reasons he should say no. Marriage is sacred. You do not know this woman. What will people think? This is not how your parents did things. You will be living a lie. Then, on the other side of the paper, he wrote down all the reasons he should say yes. You will lose the farm. Your family's legacy will be gone. The cow could be the start of rebuilding. What do you have to lose? Your parents wanted grandchildren, a continuation of the family line. He stared at the 2 columns for a long time. The reasons to say no were all about principles, about ideals, about how things should be. The reasons to say yes were all about survival, about practicality, about how things actually were. Samuel Turner had never been a practical man. But, desperate times, as they say, call for desperate measures. On the 5th day, he drove back to the Hendricks farm. Margaret was waiting on the porch, as if she had known he would come. Maybe she had. Maybe she saw in him the same desperation she felt in herself. I have conditions, Samuel said as he climbed the porch steps. Margaret raised an eyebrow. I am listening. First, this has to be a real marriage. Not just on paper. We live together, as husband and wife. I will not pretend in public while we go our separate ways behind closed doors. If we are doing this, we are doing it properly. Margaret considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. That makes sense. For appearances, if nothing else. Second, we give it a real chance. 1 year. After 1 year, if either of us wants out, we go our separate ways, no hard feelings. But, we spend that year actually trying to make it work. A year? Margaret looked surprised. I was thinking a few months, just until the inheritance is settled. 1 year, Samuel repeated firmly. Marriage is not something you try on like a new pair of shoes. If I am going to stand before God and make vows, I am going to mean them, at least for as long as we agree to try. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then, she extended her hand. 1 year. Real marriage. If it does not work, we separate after that with no obligations to each other. Samuel shook her hand, feeling the calluses on her palm that surprised him. For all her city talk, she had working hands. There is one more thing, he said. What? I want 2 cows, not 1. And the breeding bull. Margaret's eyes widened. That is asking a lot. It is, Samuel agreed. But, if I am putting my name and my reputation on the line, if I am opening my home and my life to a stranger, I want to know it actually has a chance of making a difference. 1 cow might help. 2 cows and a bull could save everything. Margaret studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes seeming to look right through him. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but it transformed her face in a way that surprised him. You drive a harder bargain than the city buyers, she said. Fine. 2 cows and the bull. But, you have to build proper fencing for them before we move them over. I will not have my father's prize cattle getting loose because of shoddy fence work. Samuel smiled back, feeling something he had not felt in a long time. Hope. "You have a deal," he said. They were married 1 week later, in a small ceremony at the county courthouse. Samuel wore his father's old suit, which hung a little loose on his thin frame. Margaret wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color in her eyes. Pastor Williams came as a witness, along with Hank Miller and his wife. Samuel could see the questions in their eyes, the confusion at this sudden marriage to a woman no one had ever seen before. But they held their peace and smiled and offered congratulations that were mostly sincere. After the ceremony, Samuel drove his new wife back to his farm. Margaret sat beside him in the truck, her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead at the dusty road. Neither of them spoke. What was there to say? They were strangers who had just promised to spend their lives together, and the reality of what they had done was only starting to sink in. When they arrived at the farmhouse, Samuel helped Margaret carry her 2 suitcases inside. He showed her around the small house, suddenly, ashamed of how rundown everything looked. The peeling wallpaper, the worn floorboards, the kitchen with its ancient appliances. But Margaret said nothing critical. She simply nodded as he pointed out each room, taking it all in with those sharp, observant eyes. "This is the bedroom," Samuel said finally, standing in the doorway of the only bedroom in the house. His parents' old room, which he had moved into after they died because it seemed like the right thing to do. "I will sleep on the couch in the living room. You can have the bed." Margaret set down her suitcase and turned to face him. "Samuel, we agreed this would be a real marriage. Real married people share a bed." Samuel felt his face flush. "I know, but I thought. I mean, we just met, and I did not want to make you uncomfortable." "I appreciate that," Margaret said. "But if we are going to make this work, we need to start as we mean to go on. We are husband and wife now. We should act like it." Samuel did not know how to respond to that. He had spent so many years alone that the thought of sharing a bed with anyone seemed foreign, almost impossible. But Margaret was right. They had made a commitment, and half measures would not honor it. That night, they lay side by side in the old bed, staring up at the ceiling, neither of them sleeping. The mattress sagged in the middle, and, no matter how hard they tried to stay on their own sides, they kept rolling toward each other. Finally, Margaret spoke. "This is awkward." Samuel laughed despite himself. "That is one word for it. I did not think this through," she admitted. "The ceremony, the legal documents, those were easy. But actually living with someone, sharing space, sharing a bed. I have been on my own for so long, I forgot what that was like." "Me too," Samuel said. "This house has been empty since my father died. I got used to the silence." They were quiet again, but it felt different now. Less awkward, more companionable. "Samuel?" Margaret said softly. "Yes? Thank you for agreeing to this. I know it was a lot to ask. But I did not know what else to do." Samuel turned his head to look at her profile in the darkness. "You do not have to thank me. This arrangement benefits both of us. Maybe it is not how most marriages start, but that does not mean it cannot work." Margaret turned to look at him too, and even in the dim light, he could see something shift in her expression. Something vulnerable, almost hopeful. "Do you really believe that?" she asked. "I do not know," Samuel admitted honestly. "But I am willing to find out." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then, she did something that surprised him. She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Good night, Samuel," she said. "Good night, Margaret." They fell asleep like that, holding hands in the darkness, two strangers bound together by desperation and hope and a handful of cattle. But, in the middle of the night, Samuel woke to find the bed empty beside him. He sat up, confused, and saw a thin line of light under the bedroom door. He could hear movement in the other room, footsteps pacing back and forth. He got up and walked to the door, but before he could open it, he heard something that made him freeze. Margaret's voice, speaking quietly, as if on a phone. But who could she be calling at this hour? And what was she saying? Samuel pressed his ear against the door, straining to hear. "Have to be careful," Margaret was saying. "He cannot know. Not yet. If he finds out before." Her voice dropped too low to hear, and Samuel strained harder, his heart beginning to race. Should never have agreed to this. But what choice did I have? After what happened? More murmuring, too soft to make out. On the wedding night. I bolted the door, just in case. But I do not think he suspects anything. He is just a simple farmer. He does not know what he married into. Samuel stepped back from the door, his blood running cold. What did she mean? She bolted the door. And what did she think he had married into? He looked around and noticed for the first time that there was indeed a new bolt on the bedroom door, installed recently by the look of it. It was currently unlocked, but the fact that it was there at all raised questions he did not know how to answer. Who was this woman he had married? And what was she hiding? Samuel did not sleep again that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to his new wife's footsteps pace the floor until dawn. When morning came, he pretended he had not heard anything, smiled at Margaret over breakfast, and went about his chores like nothing was wrong. But, inside, his mind was racing. He had married a stranger for a cow. And, now, barely 12 hours later, he was beginning to wonder if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Or if maybe, just maybe, this was all part of something much bigger than either of them understood. The next few weeks tested Samuel in ways he never expected. Living with Margaret was like sharing a house with a ghost. She was there, physically present, going through the motions of being a wife. She cooked breakfast every morning, kept the house clean, even helped with some of the farm chores. But there was always a distance between them, a wall that Samuel could not seem to breach no matter how hard he tried. Every night, he watched her bolt that door. She did it casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, but Samuel saw the tension in her shoulders, the quick glance she threw his way to see if he was watching. He never mentioned it. He never asked about the phone call he had overheard. But the questions burned inside him, keeping him awake long after Margaret's breathing had settled into the rhythm of sleep. True to her word, Margaret transferred ownership of 2 cows and the breeding bull to Samuel's farm. He spent 3 days reinforcing his fences, using materials he bought on credit from Hank Miller, who looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and concern but asked no questions. When the cattle arrived, driven over by 2 hired hands from the Hendricks place, Samuel felt his heart swell with something close to joy. They were beautiful animals. The bull was a massive creature, black as midnight with a white star on his forehead. Samuel named him Midnight. The 2 cows were sleek and healthy, their udders full, their eyes calm and intelligent. He named them Hope and Promise, because that was what they represented to him. With water from Margaret's deep well, which she had agreed to share until Samuel could drill his own, the animals thrived. Within weeks, both cows showed signs of pregnancy. The veterinarian who came to check on them declared them in excellent health and predicted healthy calves by spring. For the first time in months, Samuel began to believe that things might actually work out. The drought was still holding, but the worst of the summer heat had passed, and meteorologists were predicting a wet fall and winter. If the rains came, if his new herd continued to grow, if he could just hold on a little longer, he might actually save the farm. But the questions about Margaret would not leave him alone. He started noticing things. Small things that did not make sense. The way she flinched whenever a car came up the road. The way she would go silent and still whenever the phone rang, waiting to see who it was before answering. The collection of locks she had installed throughout the house, not just on the bedroom door but on the bathroom, the closets, even the pantry. And then, there were the letters. They came every few days, always in plain white envelopes with no return address. Margaret would take them, read them in private, and then burn them in the kitchen sink. Samuel watched her do this from the window one day, saw the way her hands trembled as the paper turned to ash. He knew he should ask her about it. They were married, after all, partners in this strange arrangement they had made. But every time he worked up the courage to broach the subject, something held him back. Fear, maybe. or the worry that the answers would be worse than the questions. One evening, about 6 weeks after their wedding, Samuel came in from the barn to find Margaret standing at the kitchen window, staring out at nothing. There were tears on her cheeks, though she made no sound. He stopped in the doorway, uncertain what to do. In all the time they had lived together, he had never seen her cry. She always seemed so composed, so controlled, like nothing could touch her. She must have sensed his presence, because she quickly wiped her face and turned to face him. "Dinner will be ready soon," she said, her voice steady despite the redness around her eyes. Samuel took a step toward her. "Margaret, what is wrong?" She shook her head. "Nothing. I am fine." "You are not fine. You are crying." Her jaw tightened, and, for a moment, Samuel thought she would brush him off again. But, then, something seemed to crack inside her, and her shoulders slumped. "I received another letter today," she said quietly. "From who?" Margaret was silent for a long moment. Then, she walked to the kitchen table and sat down heavily. Samuel followed, taking the seat across from her. "There are things I have not told you," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Things about my past. About why I really needed to get married so quickly." Samuel waited, not pushing, giving her space to tell him in her own time. "My father's will was real," Margaret continued. "The conditions about marriage and living on a farm were real. But that was not the only reason I needed to disappear from the city." She finally looked up at him, and the fear in her eyes made his stomach clench. "5 years ago, I was engaged to a man named Richard Crane. He was charming, successful, everything I thought I wanted. We were going to be married, start a family, build a life together. But I started noticing things. Missing money from our joint account. Strange phone calls at odd hours. Expensive gifts that he claimed were from clients but could not explain." Margaret's hands were shaking, and she clasped them together on the table to still them. "I hired a private investigator. I had to know the truth. And what I found out was worse than anything I had imagined." Samuel leaned forward. "What did you find?" Richard was not who he said he was. His real name was Robert Callahan. He had a history of fraud, of preying on women for their money. He had been married 3 times before, and each of those marriages ended badly. One wife died under suspicious circumstances. Another disappeared entirely. The third was in a mental institution, too traumatized to speak about what had happened to her. Samuel felt a chill run down his spine. "What did you do?" "I went to the police. I showed them everything my investigator had found. They opened an investigation, and Robert, whatever his name was, he found out. He confronted me, threatened me, said that if I testified against him, he would make me regret it." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper now. "I testified anyway. I helped put him in prison. He got 15 years for fraud and assault. I thought it was over. I thought I was safe." She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket and laid it on the table. Samuel recognized it as one of the letters she had been burning. He was released 2 months ago. Good behavior, overcrowded prisons, some technicality that reduced his sentence. And the first thing he did was start looking for me. Samuel picked up the letter and unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, almost elegant, but the words were anything but. "I know where you are," the letter read. "I know what you did. You ruined my life, Margaret. You took everything from me. Now I am going to take everything from you. I will find you, no matter where you hide. And, when I do, you will pay for what you did." There was no signature, just those cold, threatening words. Samuel looked up at Margaret, seeing her now in a completely different light. Not as a stranger who had proposed a strange business arrangement, but as a woman running for her life. A woman who had done the right thing and was being punished for it. "Why did you not tell me?" he asked. "Because I was afraid," Margaret admitted. "I thought if you knew, you would not want to marry me. You would not want to be caught up in my problems." I was desperate, Samuel. I needed somewhere to hide, somewhere he would never think to look. A small farm in the middle of nowhere, married to a man no one had ever heard of. It seemed like the perfect solution. You used me. The words came out harsher than Samuel intended, and he saw Margaret flinch. Yes, she whispered. I used you. I am sorry. I know it was wrong. But I did not know what else to do. Richard destroyed my career, my reputation, my sense of safety. Coming back to my father's farm, making that deal with you, it was the only option I had left. Samuel stood up and walked to the window, needing space to think. His mind was reeling with everything she had told him. He had married a woman with a dangerous ex-fiancé, a man who had apparently already harmed multiple women and was now looking for revenge. He had invited that danger into his life without even knowing it. But, as his anger subsided, another feeling took its place. Compassion. Margaret had done a brave thing, testifying against a dangerous criminal even when it put her own life at risk. She had paid a heavy price for that courage. And now she was alone, scared, hiding from a man who wanted to hurt her. Samuel turned back to face her. Does anyone else know you are here? Margaret shook her head. I told everyone in the city that I was going abroad, taking an extended trip to deal with my grief over my father's death. I even posted photos on social media of places I was not actually visiting. As far as Richard knows, I could be anywhere in the world. What about the lawyer? The one handling your father's estate? Vernon Hayes? Margaret's lips twisted into a grim smile. He knows I am married to a local farmer, but he does not know the details. I paid him extra to keep my information confidential. He thinks I am just a rich city woman who made an eccentric choice. Samuel remembered Vernon Hayes standing on his porch, offering to buy his land. Had that been connected to Margaret? Had Vernon been fishing for information? This changes things, Samuel said slowly. Margaret's face fell. I understand. If you want me to leave, I will. I never should have dragged you into this. It was selfish and wrong, and I will never forgive myself for putting you in danger. She started to rise, but Samuel held up a hand. I did not say I wanted you to leave. Margaret froze, confusion clouding her features. What? Samuel walked back to the table and sat down across from her again. When I agreed to marry you, I made a commitment. I told you I wanted to give this a real chance. I meant that. But now you know the truth. You know what you are getting into. Yes, Samuel agreed. Now I know the truth. And the truth is that you are scared and alone and running from a man who wants to hurt you. The truth is that you need help, and I am in a position to give it. He reached across the table and took her hands in his. They were still trembling. Margaret, I do not know what the future holds. I do not know if this marriage will work out, or if we will end up going our separate ways in a year like we planned. But I do know that I will not abandon you. Not to face this alone. Margaret's eyes filled with tears again, but these were different tears. Not tears of fear or despair, but something that looked almost like hope. Why, she asked, her voice breaking. Why would you do that for me? You barely know me. Samuel thought about the question. Why was he willing to risk his safety, maybe even his life, for a woman he had known for less than 2 months? The logical answer was that he was crazy, that he should tell her to leave and forget they had ever met. But logic had never been Samuel's strong suit. His mother used to say he had too much heart. His father said he was stubborn as a mule. Because it is the right thing to do, he said finally. And because I think there is more to you than you have let me see. I think underneath all that fear and those walls you have built, there is someone worth knowing. Someone worth fighting for. Margaret stared at him for a long moment, as if she could not quite believe what she was hearing. Then, slowly, she nodded. Thank you, she whispered. From that night on, something shifted between them. The wall that Margaret had built began to crumble, little by little. She started talking to him about her life in the city, her job as an accountant, the friends she had left behind, the life she had been forced to abandon. She told him about her childhood on the Hendricks farm, about her stern father and the mother who had died when she was young. She told him about her dreams and her fears, her hopes and her regrets. And Samuel listened. He listened like he had never listened to anyone before, absorbing every word, learning who this woman really was beneath the fear and the pretense. In turn, he shared his own stories. About growing up on this farm, the son of hard-working parents who loved the land and each other. About the dreams he had once had of going to college, seeing the world, becoming someone important. About how those dreams had faded when his mother got sick, and then disappeared entirely when his father died and left him alone with a failing farm and a mountain of debt. They talked late into the night, night after night, and, with each conversation, Samuel felt the gap between them closing. They were still awkward together sometimes, still uncertain about the boundaries of their strange relationship. But there was a connection now, something real beneath the arrangement they had made. The autumn rains finally came, just as the meteorologists had predicted. Samuel stood on his porch and watched the water pour from the sky, soaking into the parched earth, filling his water tanks, bringing his dying land back to life. He felt tears on his cheeks, mixing with the rain, and he was not ashamed. Margaret came out to stand beside him, and, without thinking, he put his arm around her. She stiffened for just a moment, then relaxed against him. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "It is a miracle," Samuel replied. And it was. The drought that had lasted through the entire summer was finally over. The land that had been brown and dead was turning green again. The cattle were thriving, the fences were strong, and, for the first time in years, Samuel Turner allowed himself to believe that everything was going to be okay. But miracles, as Samuel would soon learn, often come with a price. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks after the rains began. Samuel was in town, picking up supplies at Hank's feed store, when he noticed a stranger across the street. The man was tall, with dark hair and a sharp face, wearing a suit that was too nice for this small farming community. He was standing outside the diner, watching Samuel with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Samuel quickly finished his business and drove home, checking his rearview mirror the whole way. He did not see anyone following him, but the uneasy feeling would not go away. That night, he told Margaret what he had seen. Her face went pale. "What did he look like?" she asked. Samuel described the man, and, with each detail, Margaret's expression grew more frightened. "That sounds like Richard," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He found me. Somehow, he found me." Samuel felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Are you sure?" "No, I am not sure. I did not see him myself. But it sounds like him. The suit, the way he was watching you. That is his style. He likes to observe before he acts, to learn everything about his target before making a move." "What do we do?" Margaret shook her head. "I do not know. I thought I was safe here. I thought he would never find me." Samuel thought about calling the police, but what could he tell them? That he saw a stranger in town who might be his wife's dangerous ex-fiancé? Without proof of any actual threat, they would probably laugh him off. Instead, he did something else. He drove to the county courthouse the next morning and filed for a concealed carry permit. Then, he stopped by the sporting goods store and bought a shotgun and a box of shells. He had grown up around guns, hunting with his father as a boy, and he knew how to use them. He hoped he would never have to. When he got home, he showed the gun to Margaret. "I want you to know how to use this," he said. "Just in case." Margaret looked at the weapon with fear in her eyes, but she nodded. "Show me." They spent the afternoon behind the barn, practicing with bottles and cans set up on fence posts. Margaret was a quick learner, her hands steadier than Samuel had expected. By the time the sun started to set, she could hit a target at 20 yards without missing. "Good," Samuel said, proud of her despite the grim circumstances. "Let us hope you never have to use that skill." The days that followed were tense. Samuel found himself constantly on alert, watching the road for strange cars, listening for sounds that did not belong. He started keeping the shotgun by the front door, loaded and ready. Margaret installed more locks, reinforced the doors, kept all the curtains drawn. But the man in the suit did not reappear. There were no more threatening letters, no phone calls, no signs that anyone was watching them. After a week, Samuel began to wonder if he had imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was not him, Margaret said one evening, a fragile hope in her voice. Maybe it was just some traveler passing through, someone who stopped to look around and moved on. Maybe, Samuel agreed, though he did not believe it. The harvest season arrived, bringing with it long days of hard work. Samuel threw himself into the tasks, grateful for the distraction. He harvested what little grain he had managed to grow despite the drought. He repaired fences, cleaned out the barn, prepared for the winter ahead. Margaret worked alongside him, proving herself more capable than he had expected. For someone who had spent the last decade in an office, she knew her way around a farm. They fell into a rhythm together, working during the day, talking in the evenings, sleeping side by side in the bed that no longer felt awkward or strange. The bolt on the bedroom door remained, but Margaret stopped using it. Samuel took that as a sign of trust. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun go down, Margaret said something that caught Samuel off guard. "I think I could be happy here." Samuel looked at her, surprised. "Really?" Margaret nodded slowly. "When I first came here, all I could think about was getting my inheritance and getting back to the city. This was supposed to be temporary, a means to an end. But now..." She trailed off, searching for the right words. "Now," Samuel prompted. "Now I am not so sure I want to go back. The city feels like another lifetime ago. Another person's life. Here, everything is simple. The work is hard, but it is honest. The people are kind. And I do not feel like I am constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop." Samuel reached over and took her hand. "You do not have to go back if you do not want to. You could stay here. We could make this work for real." Margaret's eyes met his, and, for the first time, Samuel saw something there that he had not seen before. Not fear, not caution, not the careful distance she had always maintained. Something warmer. Something that made his heart beat faster. "Do you mean that?" she asked softly. "I do." She leaned toward him, and he leaned toward her, and their lips met in a kiss that felt like the beginning of something new. Something real. When they finally pulled apart, Margaret was smiling. Not the tight, controlled smile she usually wore, but a genuine, open smile that transformed her face. "I think I would like that," she said. That night, for the first time since their wedding, they came together as husband and wife in every sense of the word. It was awkward at first, two people who were still learning each other's bodies, still figuring out how to fit together. But it was also tender and gentle and honest, and when it was over, Samuel held Margaret in his arms and felt something he had given up hoping for. Love. He did not say the word out loud. It was too soon, too fragile, too easy to break with too much pressure. But he felt it, growing in his chest like a seed finally given water and light. The next morning, Samuel woke to find Margaret already up, making breakfast in the kitchen. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the small house, and he lay in bed for a moment, just breathing it in. This, he thought. This is what his parents had. This is what he had been searching for without even knowing it. He got up and padded into the kitchen, wrapping his arms around Margaret from behind and kissing her neck. "Good morning," he murmured. She turned in his arms and kissed him properly. "Good morning yourself." They ate breakfast together, talking about nothing important, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. It felt like a new chapter was beginning, a fresh start for both of them. After breakfast, Samuel went out to check on the cattle while Margaret cleaned up the kitchen. The morning was cold, frost sparkling on the grass, breath pluming in the air. Winter was coming, but Samuel did not dread it the way he had in years past. For the first time, he had enough feed, enough water, enough cattle to make it through until spring. He was checking on Hope, the cow who was furthest along in her pregnancy, when he heard the sound of a car coming up the road. He straightened up, instantly alert, and walked around the barn to see who it was. A black sedan was pulling into the driveway. Not Vernon Hayes's car, but similar. Expensive, out of place, wrong. Samuel's heart began to pound. He walked quickly to the house, where the shotgun was waiting by the door. But, before he could reach it, the car door opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, dark-haired, wearing a suit. The same man Samuel had seen in town 3 weeks ago. Richard Crane had found them. Samuel stopped in his tracks, his mind racing. The shotgun was too far away. Margaret was inside, unaware of the danger. He needed to buy time, needed to think. Richard walked toward him slowly, a smile spreading across his sharp features. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. "You must be Samuel Turner," Richard said, his voice smooth and cultured. "The husband." Samuel stood his ground, trying to keep his voice steady. "What do you want?" "I think you know what I want. I am here for my fiancée." "She is not your fiancée. She is my wife." Richard's smile flickered, a flash of something dangerous beneath the surface. "On paper, perhaps. But, Margaret and I have unfinished business. Business that does not concern you. Everything that concerns my wife concerns me." Richard stepped closer, and Samuel saw now that the man was taller than him, broader through the shoulders. He moved with a confidence that spoke of violence, of a man who was used to getting what he wanted through force. "Let me tell you something, farmer," Richard said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Margaret belongs to me. She always has. This little play acting you have been doing, this make-believe marriage, it ends today. You are going to go inside, get her, and bring her out here. Then, you are going to watch her get in my car and drive away. And, if you are very lucky, if you keep your mouth shut and forget you ever met her, I might let you keep breathing." Samuel felt fear, cold and sharp, running through his veins. But he also felt something else. Anger. Determination. This man had hurt Margaret, terrorized her, driven her from her home and her life. Samuel would be damned if he was going to let him take her again. "No," he said simply. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "I said no. Margaret is not going anywhere with you. Now get off my property before I call the sheriff." For a long moment, Richard just stared at him, as if he could not quite believe what he was hearing. Then, he laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You have no idea who you are dealing with, do you? I spent 4 years in prison because of that woman. 4 years of my life, gone. Do you think I am going to let some dirt-poor farmer stand between me and what is mine?" He reached into his jacket, and Samuel tensed, expecting a weapon. But Richard pulled out something worse. A folder, thick with papers. "Before I went to prison, I did some research," Richard said, opening the folder. "I learned a lot about Margaret. Where she grew up, who her family was, what she was worth. And I also learned some interesting things about you, Samuel Turner." He pulled out a document and held it up for Samuel to see. It was a copy of Samuel's mortgage statement, the one showing how far behind he was on payments. "You owe the bank $32,000, Richard said. You have 60 days to pay, or they take your farm. Quite a predicament." He pulled out another paper. "You also owe Hank Miller's feed store $347. The electric company is threatening to shut off your power. You are 1 bad month away from losing everything." Samuel said nothing, his jaw clenched tight. Richard smiled again, sensing he had struck a nerve. "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to bring Margaret out here, and I am going to take her with me. In exchange, I am going to pay off all your debts. Every penny. You get to keep your precious farm, and I get what I came for. Everyone wins." Samuel felt the ground shift beneath him. Richard was offering him exactly what he needed. Enough money to save the farm, to pay off his debts, to secure his family's legacy for another generation. All he had to do was hand over Margaret. A year ago, maybe even a few months ago, he might have been tempted. The farm had been his whole life, the only thing he cared about, the only thing worth fighting for. But that was before Margaret. Before he had held her in his arms, kissed her lips, felt his heart open to the possibility of something more than just survival. She was his wife now, in every way that mattered. And no amount of money was worth betraying that. No deal, Samuel said. Richard's smile vanished. Think very carefully about what you are saying. I have thought about it. The answer is no. Now get off my land. Richard's face twisted with rage. He took a step forward, and Samuel braced himself for a fight. But, before either of them could move, the front door of the house swung open. Margaret stood in the doorway, the shotgun in her hands, pointed directly at Richard. You heard him, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Get off our land. Richard froze, his eyes fixed on the gun. Margaret. There you are. I have been looking everywhere for you. I know you have. And, now you found me. So you can deliver your threats and your bribes, and then you can leave. Because I am not going anywhere with you. Not now, not ever. Put the gun down, Richard said, his voice taking on a soothing tone. Let us talk about this like civilized people. We have nothing to talk about. You had me once, and you used me. You lied to me, stole from me, threatened me when I tried to leave. But I got away. I testified against you. I helped put you in prison. And I will not let you hurt me again. Richard's mask slipped, revealing the monster beneath. You stupid woman. Do you really think you can escape me? I will find you wherever you go. I will destroy everything you care about. I will make your life a living hell until you beg me to take you back. Try it, Margaret said coldly. And I will put a bullet in your chest. I have been practicing. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Richard's eyes flickered between Margaret and Samuel, calculating his options. Samuel could see the wheels turning in his head, the predator deciding whether to pounce or retreat. Finally, Richard stepped back. This is not over, he said, his voice low and venomous. I will be back. And, when I come back, you will not see me coming. He turned and walked to his car, moving with a forced casualness that did not hide the rage boiling beneath the surface. He got in, started the engine, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Margaret lowered the gun, and, suddenly, all the strength seemed to drain out of her. She sagged against the doorframe, tears streaming down her face. Samuel was at her side in an instant, taking the gun from her trembling hands, pulling her into his arms. It is okay, he murmured against her hair. He is gone. You are safe. He will come back, Margaret sobbed. You heard him. He will not stop until he destroys us. Samuel held her tighter, his mind racing. Richard Crane was not going to give up. He would come back, probably with reinforcements, probably with a plan that did not involve talking. They needed help. They needed protection. They needed something more than a shotgun and determination. We need to tell the sheriff, Samuel said. Margaret shook her head. The sheriff cannot do anything. Richard did not break any laws. He did not threaten us directly, did not trespass, did not assault anyone. He is too smart for that. He knows how to stay just barely on the right side of the law while making your life a nightmare. Then, what do we do? Margaret pulled back and looked up at him, her eyes red but determined. We prepare. We fortify. And we pray that when he comes back, we are ready for him. Samuel nodded, his jaw set. He did not know what the coming days would bring. He did not know if they would survive what Richard Crane had planned for them. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was not going to let anyone hurt his wife. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, he would protect her. Or die trying. The days after Richard's visit were filled with preparation. Samuel drove to town and spoke to Sheriff Harris, a grizzled veteran who had been keeping the peace in Clayton County for over 20 years. The sheriff listened patiently to everything Samuel told him, taking notes and asking questions, but his final answer was exactly what Margaret had predicted. "I believe you," Sheriff Harris said, leaning back in his chair. "I have heard stories about men like this Richard Crane. Smooth talkers who hide their cruelty behind expensive suits and pretty words. But, until he actually does something, breaks a law I can charge him with, my hands are tied. So we are just supposed to wait until he hurts someone?" Samuel asked, frustrated. The sheriff sighed. "I did not say that. I will keep an eye out for him, tell my deputies to watch for any strange cars or suspicious activity around your property. And I will make some calls, see if I can find out more about his record, what he has been up to since he got out of prison. But, legally, there is not much more I can do." Samuel thanked him and left, feeling more worried than when he had arrived. If the law could not protect them, they would have to protect themselves. He stopped at the